Welcome to Honest Faith, Hard Questions, an Emerge community podcast and a production of Lakewood Church of the Nazarene. We believe the church is a living community meant to experience new life together, even in all of our messiness. And so we invite you to leave your easy answers at the door and to bring your whole self to the table as we discover a living faith together. So grab a seat. Let's talk. Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back. Good to see. We don't see you.
We don't see or hear them.
You might see us, and you definitely do hear us. So
Yeah.
It's good to be seen and definitely heard, I suppose. Don't make fun of me.
Podcasting is weird. It's an interesting thing that
Well, and
to do.
especially when you're trying to frame it around like conversation. You know, we do hear from some of you, which is fantastic. I love getting to do that, but we definitely won't hear from you about this particular episode until after it comes out. So it will be good to hear from you. Maybe I should say it like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, one thing before we get started today is if you are following us live as these episodes are coming out week by week, we just wanted to give you a heads up that next week we will not have an episode come out because we are moving. And yeah, we're not like moving states or even moving cities. We're just moving from one house to another house. If you know our personal lives, you know that this is a big deal. Been a long time coming. We're very excited about it. But yeah, so there will be no episode coming out the first week of September is when we'll be taking a break, but you can expect an episode coming out 2 weeks from when this episode goes live. It's going to be a really good one. It's an audience submitted question. I wanted to try and start weaving some of those in. So if you're somebody listening and there's a topic that you want us to address, let us know. You could find your topic is one of our episodes. We've got one of those coming up in just a couple weeks, so that'll be really exciting as well.
It's cool to have people following along with us.
Yeah.
It's been a fun ride.
Yeah.
Fun thing to start here, this podcast.
We definitely appreciate everybody giving us time and attention for sure. Well, we have spent the past 8-ish episodes or so looking at the internal functions of the church. And I thought it would be good just in this first inaugural run before we start really shifting topics and maybe diving a lot deeper into some, to look at the church, but to look at it from an external perspective. And by that, what I mean is not looking at the church from the outside, but asking what is the church meant to do and be outside of itself. There is a big, scary word that we use for this when we talk about things like church mission or church working in the community.
What do you mean by scary?
Well, I mean scary as in people hear it, and we've actually used it in reference to a tradition that we've been kind of poking at because it's the most dominant tradition here in the Western hemisphere of the world that we find ourselves. But by big and scary, I mean most people don't like to engage with it. They don't know how to engage with it, and it's something that we very often just leave off to the side. I call it the E word. You probably know it better as the word evangelism. Dun, dun, dun.
Well, there are some listeners who are going to be like, why is that scary?
Yeah. Well, I guess, again, I find it scary for a couple of reasons. One, there was a video recently of a lady who got onto an airplane and who said that she really likes a captive audience and got up and started, preaching to people on this airplane about how they needed to turn their lives around and needed to start following Jesus. And, in the news that gets hailed as a really bad thing because people are on an airplane and they don't want to talk to their next door neighbor or the person sitting next to them, much less hear somebody preach at them for however long this lady was going. She did end up getting kicked off of the plane.
I was going to say, didn't she get kicked off the plane?
Yeah, she got kicked off the plane, and I think she got banned from future flights. The scary part of it, though, is I think when we think of evangelism, and especially like work in the church, this is the idea that we have of it. It's going out into the public square. It's when I was in college, the really popular picture was of a street preacher who would like spread his legs out and do the splits and like point at somebody and be like, you, like I'm singling you out specifically, you know, and it's this big grand motion that we feel like we have to make in order to tell somebody about Jesus. And where I think this gets so tricky, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk about it, is because when we talk about what is the church meant to do inside of the world, there is a component of it that necessitates us being messengers of the reign of Christ. Where I think we've gotten tripped up, and again, kind of the thread through this whole first set of episodes has been this very strong tradition that you and I grew up with of individualism, of, you know, personal faith, and of having people need to accept that personal faith, or like, you know, pray the Billy Graham sinner's prayer, you know, to do these certain things in order to be part of the church. And it seems as though evangelism has taken on this role where it is about getting people into the church. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to kind of sit with that today, because I don't think that is a totally accurate definition of what evangelism is. I also don't think it's totally fair to expect that from people. And I am worried that as a church, that is what we have put out there. So I don't know. What do you think?
That's very interesting. And I just know that there are people out there who maybe grew up in church, or maybe not, but that, like, I've seen online this term, like, I have a hard time pronouncing it for some reason. Proselytizing?
Yeah,
how do you pronounce that word?
I think it's
proselytizing.
Yeah, I think it's proselytizing. It's something like that.
I don't know how to say it for some reason, but what that means is a Christian pursuing somebody, maybe asking them to go to coffee with them or whatever, but for the sole goal of getting them in the church, and with no other intention of, like, genuinely wanting to get to know that person as a friend. It's all about, you want them in your church and you want them as a number. And there's a lot of people hating on that online. I think in conjunction with the deconstruction movement. But yeah, I know there are people out there that have negative feelings about this, and I think that it is connected with evangelism. And yeah, so I think it's a tricky thing, and I'm glad we're talking about it.
Yeah,
there's people out there that have an allergy to it.
Well, yeah, and I think you touched on the root of it in your statement, that what most people have an aversion to is, you are befriending me, or you're doing this evangelism work for the sake of getting me to go to your church. Mm-hmm. And I think this is the root problem of it, is that evangelism has become so tied to the growth of the church that it's become almost impossible to, like, separate out the two. And so on the one hand, right, it has a tendency to emphasize, like, how many nights a week are you coming to church? How many church activities are you being part of? You know, are you part of a Bible study or not? Very often the first sign that somebody is falling away from faith is that they have stopped attending various church functions. Where, like, I know we talked about in an episode that the church could be one of the places that could help sustain faith for somebody who is going through a period of doubt, were the church to be able to, you know, function internally in a different way. I also think it has a tendency to emphasize the way that modern society and modern communities have a tendency to organize ourselves, not just around a similar principle, but over and against other principles. And so what I mean by that is, like, the church is defining itself as, we're a body that does this, but we are more a community that doesn't do those things. And so trying to evangelize to somebody is trying to take them out of that and into us.
Yeah.
And again, I think we talked about it in an earlier episode, but it's this idea of, in order to belong, there are certain things that you have to do in order to cross that threshold of belonging first. And evangelism is, one, trying to get somebody to cross that threshold. And two, if it doesn't work to get them to cross that threshold, it solidifies the internal base of saying like, well, they weren't going to listen because they're so lost or something. And so it kind of does this double function the way that it has been working.
I know that we're going to get there, but the question in my mind is like, well, how do we not throw the baby out with the bathwater with this? And I know we're about to explain that, but that's the question coming to my mind is how can we be a missional church and an outreaching church?
Yeah. Well,
without doing that.
I think it's important to say, just as we get into it, that I think the idea behind evangelism and behind missions is really, really good. Because again, we've spent 8 episodes now talking about the way that the church functions, what the church does, and if the church were to be able to live up to this kind of ideal standard of, mediating God's presence to the world, then like we should expect that mediation to be happening to people who are not a part of the community, who exist outside of it. And so, the desire to see people have a more rich and full life, I think, is most people's motivation for evangelism. I think that the method and mechanism that we have chosen is usually faulty, because it's become so twisted and tied up with this idea of, well, our church has to grow, and in order to grow, it has to tithe. And in order for people to tithe, we have to have more attendance numbers. And, it becomes this organizational game as opposed to this spiritual and relational game.
Yeah.
And so this is where I think the trouble happens. And I think we've done a good job teasing it out. Again, in the past 8-ish episodes or so, saying like the church functions right now as an organization, and that I think is what a lot of people are reacting to really explicitly. And it's becoming more and more polarizing as people start to define themselves more by their political boundaries or more by the ways that they choose to identify themselves, right? Like these things are becoming more insular and tighter and harder to break into. And so as much as I'm pressing on this idea of evangelism, I want to say, before we define what I think would be really healthy and helpful evangelism, I think we need to say that evangelism is something necessary and important. And if we're going to see society, like the Western society that we live in, shift, I think it is going to happen because the people who follow Jesus Christ have picked up a healthy definition of evangelism and have decided to do something about it.
That's good.
So I agree with you that, there's an element of this that we need to see, we need to hang on to, and there's an element of it that we need to not. So where I think would be helpful maybe to start is to start by thinking about, okay, we have the definition of the church as this community that is modeled after mediating God's presence. What exactly does that mean for the rest of the world around us? And, we spent an episode, I think it was episode 6, talking about how the pastor kind of functions in this mediating role and how sometimes we have a tendency to elevate that. I think that society has done that with the church, where there's kind of an implicit understanding of, the church is meant to be like that holy place. And the people who go there are like supposed to be that holy people or something like that. And I say it with quotes because those words take on different, if you're somebody who's been deeply wounded by the church and, you have very strong atheistic commitments that you have made, like those words are very negative, right? Being a holy church is, usually synonymous with being very hypocritical or being very tight wound, or something like that. But there is kind of this implicit understanding that the church is meant to be separate, but is also meant to represent God in some significant way. So I think that's an important part for us to hold on to. The second thing that I think is really important for us to hold on to, and I want to talk mostly about how this plays out, is that Jesus' stated mission in the Gospel of John, chapter 10, is to give people life and according to the King James Version, life to the full. And I have latched really hard onto that idea when thinking about what is the church's mission, both locally, but also globally, and then even thinking like eternally. Because I think one of the places where we have a tendency to misstep is we lean too heavily into this idea that evangelism is about saving souls.
Right.
I've talked about it in a couple of sermons where what I will ultimately say to people is that if your understanding of salvation is just being saved from hell or from eternal hellfire, what you are seeking is not the kind of salvation that the New Testament offers. What you are seeking is glorified fire insurance.
Ooh, that's a big statement. You're going to want to unpack that.
Right. And
yeah.
But I think this is what we're running up against, right? Is most people are trying to or wanting to or have been taught to fit into this system of believing in Jesus gets you out of hell and, you're going to spend eternity wherever you're going to end up. And so you need to use the little snippet of life that you have in order to make sure that you spend eternity somewhere better. And, there's... Again, I hesitate to say, let's just completely and totally throw that out. I think there's a misunderstanding of hell that's happening there. I think there's a misunderstanding of what this life is meant to represent for us. So what I will say in terms of evangelism is what I think that we are doing is meant to stretch beyond just what happens into eternity, and it is necessarily meant to touch into our lives here and now.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why I think, the words of John 10:10, I think are really helpful, because Jesus says that I have come that they may have life and have it to the fullest. And he's not talking about just life eternal, though that would be part of having a full life, but that also means having a full life here and now.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this dual patterned way of living. And I say dual patterned, it's like this dual tiered way of living, right? Where in the here and now, we say Jesus is moving us towards having the fullest life possible that we can have, knowing that the world around us is broken, that the systems that humans have created are broken and almost always inherently favor one person or one set of people over another one. And so Jesus is working now to give us this full life. And the hope that Christians have is that when the Lord finally returns, that all of these things will be set right. This is also why the ideas that we have about resurrection are so important, because the way that the Gospels, the way that Paul writes about it, is that the resurrection is not simply just Jesus inhabited like a spiritual body over his physical body, but it's that his physical body was in fact raised back to life. But it was more than just raised back to life like Lazarus. Like the way that I distinguish them is Lazarus was revived, Jesus was resurrected. And it's an important distinction because Lazarus was brought back to life and died again. Jesus did not. Jesus was brought back to life and takes on this new mode of existence. And so
he ascends.
Well, and he ascends afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the way that N.T. Wright will talk about it is you have the crucifixion is Jesus sitting on his throne, right? Taking his enthronement. He dies. And then when he resurrects is when he begins to take on this new mode of existence. And his ascension is actually his ascension into the heavenly throne room, where now he is governing and operating the world and moving it towards its final fulfillment. And the really important point that I want to make about this and why it's important to talk about the fancy theological term for this is soteriology. It just means your theology of salvation. The reason I think it's important for us to examine our soteriology when we're talking about evangelism is that the stated goal that we have for evangelism is inherently tied to what we think we are saving people for and what we think we are saving people from.
Yeah.
And so if we are only saving people for missing out on hell and getting into heaven, then evangelism is going to look a lot like come and join our church, make sure that you pay your tithe, make sure that you stay pure from everything else outside of you, because when it's all said and done, you're going to be in eternity with us. On the other hand, if physical life is worth valuing, if the point of Jesus is not just to come in and wipe out everything and start from scratch, but is to restore and renew, then that means that there is actually something about the mode and the method that we exist in now that is not only important, but will in fact be part of this eternal and new existence. And again, the paradigm that I use for this is the resurrection of Jesus' body, where, when the disciples are imagining it, when Paul's imagining it, they're saying that Jesus' resurrected body, Paul calls him the first fruits of this new creation, where it's Jesus' body containing the marks of the crucifixion, all of the wounds that he had, but they're saying like he ascended to some new mode of existence, and that's the kind of body that we are going to have. Still bearing something from the old, but ultimately and radically transformed into something that provides life and life eternal.
Mm-hmm. Give me a second.
Yeah.
So I think that one way I have observed Christians, I guess perhaps living out of a different soteriology slightly, and help me unpack what I'm trying to say here if you can. I've definitely observed the strong emphasis on being saved from hell. And we're getting ready for our mansion in heaven, and we're just trying to bring along as many people as we can. I have definitely observed that. But I would also argue I've observed Christians taking seriously, like, holy living, but I've seen that become twisted in a legalistic thing where it's caring a lot about how we live here and now, but almost in an unhealthy way there too.
Yeah.
Where it's like this performative, perfectionistic thing that feels also based in fear and is harmful.
Mm-hmm.
So how do people find themselves in that place? What is the misstep there? Because I see that as not just chilling until we get to heaven.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But,
no, I think it's a very astute observation, and I agree that what we're talking about when we're talking about, entering into something like the community of faith, or, having Jesus impact our life here and now, we're not just simply talking about like, yeah, let's just chill until Jesus makes everything right. Where I think we have a misstep is when we start categorizing holy living as right versus wrong, as opposed to healthy versus unhealthy. So the example, I think we used this example a couple weeks ago, is in talking about something like Sabbath, where, the Bible talks about Sabbath as something that's really good. It's something that everybody should be doing as a part of a holy life. Like, you should be practicing Sabbath. The question becomes, okay, what does that look like in application, right? We have actually had a couple of people on some of our other social media pages, like, this seems to be a thing that people pick up on and they want to like poke at and prod at, and they say, okay, well, what day is the Sabbath? Like, what day should you practice it on? Like, shouldn't there be a strict and rigid way of practicing Sabbath? And this is actually something that Jesus talked about with the Pharisees, right? There was a societally accepted day of practicing Sabbath, and Jesus and his disciples are going, or Jesus is going and he does a miracle on the Sabbath, and the Pharisees, have a big problem with this. And they're like, why is it, that you're doing this thing on the Sabbath? And Jesus' response back to them is, don't you know that the Sabbath was made for man, or for humans, not humans for the Sabbath? And what I think Jesus is doing here is it's a subtle shift in thinking, where it's, instead of thinking about, I need to pattern my life after right and wrong, which are moral categories, often what we're talking about with holy living is, I need to pattern my life in ways that are healthy and not unhealthy. Now, this does not do away with the distinction that there are certain things that are morally right and morally wrong to do. And like, these would also fit into the healthy and unhealthy categories. Where I think we make the misstep is when we start talking about something like Sabbath as a moral category, where like, you are morally in the wrong if you have not practiced Sabbath on Saturday. Or you have morally made a misstep, right? If you went to the grocery store to, I don't know, buy a loaf of bread, or, heaven forbid you have cooked something, on your Sabbath day, right? And so there's this big question of, one, what category are we in? Are we in a moral category, or are we in a healthy and unhealthy category? What I would say is a broad category of holiness encompasses both. It has to encompass the moral life, but it encompasses the healthy and unhealthy way of life. And where I think we need to be very careful when we're talking about healthy and unhealthy is to not move into the moral realm, but then to start asking, like, what is a healthy way of life and what is an unhealthy way of life? Mm-hmm. And for a holiness people, we would want to say that what we are talking about is living life in the healthiest possible way. It's living life to its fullest measure in every respect of the word. The Hebrew word that I want to use here is the word shalom. And people have probably heard the word shalom used as something like peace, which there is a sense where it can mean something like peace, but a more accurate depiction of what shalom is getting at is this idea of wholeness, of, complete and total. I don't even want to use the word unity, because whole, WHOLE, is really the best way to think about it. If you have time, if you want to do a word study, it's interesting to see where the word shalom is used in the Hebrew Bible or in the Old Testament, because it is used for places where they're talking about, like, there's no more war and there's no more conflict because society is whole, right? It's at peace. Shalom is also used for things like the stones that they used to build the temple. Where is it? It's somewhere in Kings, and I'm having trouble remembering exactly where, but it talks about the stones that are used for the temple are shalom. They're whole stones, like they're not cut, they're not cracked in any way, shape, or form, like they have this holistic property about them that makes them more suited for being used in the temple as opposed to other kind of stones. And this, I think, is really what we're getting at, where when we're talking about, like, what is the purpose of the Christian life? The purpose of the Christian life is to live this kind of shalom life, a whole and very full life. And what the Christian would say is that you can have and you can actually participate in some of these different aspects of a whole life. Taking Sabbath, not murdering people, following some of these different laws, but ultimately your life will not be as full as it can be until you have fulfilled that spiritual relationship. Where we start to go cross with that is to say the spiritual relationship then has to look like X and Y and Z, right? It has to look like, make sure that you go to church every single Sunday. Make sure that you're, if you're in the evangelical tradition, right? Make sure that you're reading your Bible and you're having a quiet time every single day for however long prescribed period of time, right? Like there's all of these different things where we can say, like, great, it's good to have this thing, but as humans, we like to have things in a small and digestible and, like, just give me a checklist that I can go and check things off.
And like we talked about, I think it was last episode, that list has, like, the church has kind of progressed with it, where it used to be no tattoos and...
Well, our church has progressed with it.
Well, I guess so. I just mean compared to 50 or 100 years ago.
Well, and I guess I would hesitate even to use the word, like, progressed in it, because progression implies that there is an already stated goal that you're moving towards.
Yeah.
And
maybe I mean evolved.
Evolved or changed or, is working dynamically. Because this is a theological pet peeve of mine, is when we're talking about, what does the church look like in the 21st century? And, I bring up a topic like, let's talk about AI or let's talk about the internet. And the response that people give back to me is, well, Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun. So, we're dealing with the same problems they dealt with 200 years ago. And it's like, absolutely not.
No.
Right? Like, but this is part of the beauty of reading the scriptures dynamically.
Yeah.
It's part of the beauty of living in community, is it saying we have this stated goal and we know what to do, right? As Wesleyans, we talk about it as perfectly restored relationships with others, with God, with self, with creation. Like, that is the stated goal. The way that we do that is going to be culturally dependent on how we answer it. So even just 30 years ago, back in the 90s when I was born, right, the question of AI wasn't a question. Mm-hmm. There was nothing that we could do to potentially talk about that because it just wasn't a thing culturally that we were dealing with. And so asking what does the gospel have to say to AI didn't matter at that point because we weren't dealing with it. And there were a bunch of other things that we needed to talk about at that point. And I think this is part of the evangelistic discussion. It's not just sweeping everything under the rug and saying like, oh, we've always been dealing with this. And so to have a full life, we can just read a book somewhere. We can find the answer and everything will be hunky dory and good to go. And it's like, no, like there's great wisdom. We need to be reading, how people in our tradition, how Christians who have come before us have done things. I wish that more Christians would read people like the Church Fathers or John Wesley or Karl Barth, all of these great and awesome theologians who have gone before us. I know that they're really hard to read sometimes, but like it forces us to engage with tradition, but it also gives us a lens into how they were dealing with things at the time.
Yeah.
So,
and it helps us to understand why we believe what we believe, why we do what we do, or not do.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, knowing your tradition, knowing where it comes from and how it is impacting the way that you do what you do is massively important.
Yeah.
And I also think that it helps us in understanding, if evangelism, right, is bringing people to this idea of a full life or real fullness of life, it really helps us in understanding like what are the ways that the community that I find myself a part of is actually attempting to do that. And then we can ask the question, is it working or not? And this is where I think evangelism has missed the mark in the modern world. Because we've so strongly mapped ourselves onto this localized cluster of, this is my church, like these are my people, we're going to do things in this very specific way. And evangelism is about bringing people into that bubble. And again, I think there's something important, there's something healthy, and there's something necessary about having a local cluster of people. But if evangelism is only focused on growing your local cluster and is not centered on bringing life to the world around you, to the rest of the community around you, then we've missed something really important and fundamental about what it means to be the church in that way.
To be really brutally honest about this, I have observed, and not just observed, but also myself participated in an attitude of the church towards the community and seeing need around us as more of an inconvenience and a bother than something that we allow to break our heart and be moved to compassion towards them. And as I want to caveat that with, I grew up in ministry, as I've said many times now on the podcast. And when you're in ministry, that can overwhelm everything sometimes. And it's like almost your full-time job to balance the people already in your church and also everyone that you see outside of the church. And your church only has so many resources and you have to manage it and make it sustainable, and it's not simple at all. It's not. But I do find, I have seen it is so easy to slip into a numbness to the community around a church. It is so easy to just zero in on your own church and just not spend that time. And it shouldn't be all on the pastor. We've said that too. It should be everybody in the community. We should all be goading one another on into giving, into serving, into reaching out. So I'm not saying this to guilt any pastor who listens to this at all. It should not all be on the pastor. The church is each person that's a part.
Mm-hmm.
Each person that's a part. But Yeah. Can confirm.
Yeah. Well, and one of the other pieces of this that I have found helpful in like rethinking about what evangelism could look like is to think about the way that the Gospels present Jesus, the way that they present him in doing all of his miracles and in doing all of his teaching is what he is doing is bringing God's like heavenly space into the earthly human space, into the places that are broken and that are in the most need of healing. In fact, you see all of the miracles that Jesus does is usually meeting some kind of need that somebody has. I was racking my brain while you were talking, and I can't think of an example where Jesus just does a miracle to be like, hey, look, magic trick, right? Like it's always serving some kind of purpose, like it's meeting a need of some kind. And the idea behind it, and again, the theological message that the Gospels are really putting out there is that it's not about getting people to believe, because Jesus actually a number of times in the Gospel says, no, like Mark particularly has this, which is still astounding to me, and this is not an answer to it, but Mark has it where Jesus will do a miracle and people will be like, oh my gosh, you're the Messiah. And he's like, yeah, cool, don't tell anybody. Right. And if the express purpose was only belief to save souls, then like that's completely counter to the mission. But if what Jesus is doing is really trying to have heaven break into the earthly reality, then this could make some kind of sense.
Yeah.
I latch really heavily onto the line in the Lord's Prayer from Sermon on the Mount, where the prayer starts with, our Father who's in heaven, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Yeah.
And I wonder if sometimes we pray that as like God, just go ahead and wipe out this place and replace it with yours, instead of, God, let your will actually be done here as it is in your own space. Like, let these two things actually overlap, which it does seem like, the biblical picture of something like Eden or something like the New Jerusalem. Like, these are the places where heaven and earth have completely and totally overlapped again, and I do think that this is the primary theological call and vision of evangelism, is let heaven and earth overlap each other, and the places where it doesn't, let the church be the vehicle that brings that new life, that brings heaven to earth into those places.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think you're right. I think we ultimately fail to do that when we become numb to the needs around us, or when it becomes really easy to be overwhelmed by how much need there actually is.
Yeah.
Because there is a ton of need. And what I have found particularly interesting about the church in the Western world specifically is the way that we have tied ourselves with something like the United States government, or have tied ourselves with other local organizations. Like, we have released a lot of the responsibility for that onto somebody else, because at some point we've said, it wasn't financially feasible for us, like we weren't able to do it, and so we have given that responsibility over to do those things. And the big problem with that is, if we want to recapture this idea of evangelism, it's going to involve more than just saying like, okay, let's just not have that other organization take care of it. Like, we're just going to take it all back, because we're not in a position to do that. But it also can't be just, let's completely abdicate our responsibility and let somebody else take care of it. Because again, like this is the fundamental part of what it means to be the church, is to bring these things out to other places. And so this is where I think the real messy middle of this conversation is that we exist at a time and a place where the church kind of finds itself in this really weird middle ground, where we get our tithes and we use most of our tithes and our offerings to pay for the buildings that we meet in, to pay for, the services that we put on and the activities and all of these things. And like, the activities and events and productions that we put on, like, those in and of themselves are not bad. Like, they can be really good things. I just wish that, and this is probably very idealistic of me, but I just wish that we could also take stock and say, like, how much of it is going towards that and how much of it could be going towards bringing earth to heaven, bringing heaven to earth. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. That's really good.
I think part of the the messy middle of this conversation that would be helpful for the church to start discussing is to start asking, like, practically, what does this look like? Because again, I think it's easy for people who are part of a church to say, like, oh, well, our church offers a meal to people who are experiencing homelessness once a week. And, we put tithe money towards that. And so, like, we're good, right? And I mean, you can even hear that subtle shift that we talk about in Holy Life, where when we use the phrase like we're good or we have met our obligation, we're starting to move into a moral category and not a healthy and unhealthy category.
Mm-hmm.
That's the second that we start moving into that checkbox. But I also think that's one of the ways that we start to put it at an arm's length. We start to say, like, yeah, I'm going to let somebody else do that. Let me just give the resources towards that. And giving resources is great. Please don't stop giving resources. But if you feel like giving resources is the only thing that you can and should do for that, then like there's a deeper level to a full life that you're being called to. Because the relationships that you can build with somebody who has experienced a vastly different life than you, with somebody who lives life very differently, like people who experience homelessness they're living a life, and that life is a very different picture of the life that you are living. And if that person is still made in the image of God, it's still necessary to understand, like, how are they experiencing life? Do they have a full life or not? And is there something that I can do to help bring it to them in the same way that Jesus did? So that was a really long and roundabout way to get back to the question of, like, part of the messy middle of this is asking practically, how do we do this? Because, we are also still people who have jobs. We have family members to tend to. We have a lot of problems where it's like, I'm trying my level best to bring life to all of these different places. You and I right now are in the middle of raising a 3-year-old. And let me tell you what, bringing life to the places where he is, on the one hand, isn't hard because he's super cute and everybody loves him. And like, he brings a lot of joy into the room. He's also a destructive tornado of a child. Yeah. Right. And like, it's asking the question of, how and what do I do with something like that as well? Right. So the practical side and the playing out of this is, it's a really strong question, and it touches on some of the same themes as the Sabbath question that we asked earlier, where we can all agree it's good to take Sabbath. In the same way, we can all agree that it's good for everybody to live as full a life as possible. The question is practically, how does that play out? What does it look like to have Sabbath? Does that mean that we close all the restaurants one day a week so people after church have to go home and cook for themselves? Does that provide Sabbath or not? Is there such a thing as taking a break from parenting? I know we talked about that already, or what does it look like to have a full life when your life is wrapped up in taking care of your kids and in trying to get to work on time, and trying to do all of these other different things where you do not have the time, the ability, or the resources to bring life to somebody else because you are drowning on your own. Right? Like there are very intense practical questions, I think, around this that have to enter into the conversation at this point as well, because all of this is part of evangelism. And that's the thing that I think we miss, is that evangelism is, again, it's this bigger, broader category that it has to extend beyond just, can I get this person to pray a prayer and to come sit next to me on Sundays? And where I think, to get all the way back to what you said at the beginning, where I think we can avoid throwing the baby out with the bathwater is to say, like, having somebody pray a prayer and to say, like, I want to follow Jesus because I think that the way that he teaches, the way that he's asked us to live life truly does show me what is the best way to live. Like, I think that is a healthy way to do things. Having somebody come sit next to you on Sundays is awesome. Like, that's building great community. And if you can do that consistently, you can build a really strong and intimate friendship out of that. But the purpose has to be done with saying, we're seeking to live a full life together, not we're seeking to grow our organization, even if that's what ends up happening or not happening.
Yeah. I mean, this is such a huge idea and question here. Yeah. And this is a very difficult shift. This would be a difficult shift for the church to make. And I think what I come back to is, if we are faithful in being filled by God and trusting in Him and receiving Him and His life, if we are truly, truly worshiping Him, truly dedicating our days to Him and our families to Him, then this heart for outreach and giving and serving is the natural effect of that. It will just start to happen.
Well,
if we are truly communing with the Lord, then our hearts will be broken for what His heart is broken for. And He will cause us to cultivate life and life abundant in ourselves and in those around us and the communities around us. And I say that just in response to the thought of, man, like, I'm so depleted, and everyone seems to be so depleted all the time lately in our culture. And it is overwhelming looking at the need that is everywhere, looking at the suffering and the struggle.
Yeah.
But the hope is that we have our source of life, and we can be cared for, and we can overflow in the Lord.
The only thing I want to add to that, because I think that's really good, the way that I have found it really helpful to frame it is that the word evangelism comes from the Greek word euangelion, which literally just means good news. It comes from the Greek word angel or angelos, which is a word that we use for angel, which is super cool, but that just means like messenger, and the prefix eu just means good. So it's good messenger or good news. And I find that helpful because I think most people in life, and especially people who are saying like, I'm finding myself changed and transformed, there's really good things happening for me and I want that for other people. Like, the whole point of doing evangelism is like, I do have good news for you. If you're feeling burnt out, I have good news.
Yeah.
Let's find a way for you to exist in this relationship where you can thrive. If you are somebody who is lacking resources, I have good news. We have a community that can help get you access to resources. If you're a parent who is raising a 3-year-old or has 5 kids or however many, I have good news. We have a community of people who, can come alongside you and, can help with raising your child, right? Like, this is part of this evangelistic idea is, yes, right? As we are changed and transformed, as we are sanctified, as we Wesleyans like to say, the outpouring of the good news comes from, like, genuinely, we can impact your life here and now.
Yeah.
And the beautiful part of that is that we impact your life here and now. You live a full life in the here and in the now. And then the way the Nazarene Wesleyan holiness doctrine says it is that life doesn't stop when you die. Is that fullness of life, it becomes so full that not even death can contain it, and it spills out into eternity. And that's also good news.
Yeah.
Because it means that, there's still more to enjoy, and there's still more to discover, and like what that looks like and how those things are going to go is a philosophical and theological question for a different time, but that for me is the heart of where evangelism is at. It's, like you said, that restored relationship, sanctifying me, that is spilling out and over into other people. It's like the extreme amplified version of, dude, I found this amazing restaurant and you have to go try it.
Yeah, I just think it's meant to be a natural thing that we just do. Like, it's not supposed to be this unsolvable riddle that we have to like struggle to untangle out of our own limited strength. That like it's just, we're just supposed to receive the Lord and then let Him work through us. Like, I think it's meant to be the Lord. The Lord has done it through the Lord's people, through all of human history. The Lord wants to do it through us.
I would say yes. And I do think at the particular cultural moment that we are experiencing, it's going to be difficult because it requires us to break out of our isolated and siloed bubbles and communities.
Yeah.
And that's the really tricky part, is that it's both a, let the Lord work through you and have it be a natural outpouring, but also recognize that that natural outpouring is probably going to cause you to cross cultural boundaries in some places. And so, for us in the Western world, it's going to cause you to cross the cultural boundary of in and out of the church. It's going to cause you to cross the cultural boundary of, wearing, I don't know why this came to mind, wearing shorts to church on Sunday. Like if you bring somebody in who doesn't have a church background and they're like, I don't know what to wear, like I'm just going to show up, right? Part of bringing good news to that person is, come on in. The table of the Lord is still prepared for you in that same way. And so it's learning to cross those, and it's going outside of, what we would consider to be our holy huddle or our cultural bubble, and stepping outside of that and saying that there is still good news available for people, even if they never look exactly like us.
Yeah, I think that's a really poignant word, is that there is something countercultural. There's a emotion we have to make that feels different in order to be a church that is different, I guess. Yeah. I thought I had a profound thought and it didn't come out very well.
That's good. That's part of it's part of the processing of this.
Yeah, it's very intricate and it's challenging. It's good. It's challenging.
The thing maybe that would be helpful to end with is the thing that I have struggled with, but I have heard in some of my other classes and some of my other training, is that when you start doing this kind of work, whether it's evangelism or, I talk about this in biblical studies sometimes, is when you are dealing with this kind of material, you're asking people to change the way that they view the world on a fundamental level. And like with evangelism, it's the same thing. You're asking people to change the way that they view the world on a very, very fundamental level. And it almost never happens immediately. It's usually a very long and drawn out process. And one of the best examples that I can give is, in talking with people in the church, I've heard people struggle and say, like, why wouldn't people want to come to our church? Like, why wouldn't they want to do this? And the example I can give back is, well, let's say that an imam comes from, a mosque down the street. We've got a couple of those in Denver. If an imam were to come into your neighborhood and were to knock on your door and say, hey, why don't you come to our mosque for, 3 times a day for daily prayer? Would you go just immediately? And if you did go, would you go because you're genuinely interested in looking to change? Or would you be like, no, I'm not doing that? And most of the time, the reaction that I think we give to that is what we need to recognize we're doing when we're doing biblical studies, when we're doing church work, when we're doing evangelism. Like, what we're doing is saying, we want you to view the world on a fundamentally different level.
Wow.
On a level of, God loves the world. There is enough abundance, and that, good news is available for you wherever you may happen to find yourself. Because I think the unfortunate reality is most people don't experience the world that way. They experience it as the resources are scarce. I have to get mine. And if I don't protect myself, then nobody is going to look out for me. And like having to unlearn that and relearn something else is not something that can be done in a short conversation. And the same thing is true if you grow up in the church, like having to go back into the scriptures and relearn and reread and restudy there's a reason it's a lifelong process of sanctification. It's something that we're constantly doing, but we're changing it at a fundamental level. It's slow and laborious work, but it's part of living a full life.
I think my last statement will be, there's a misconception in the church that the Christian life is supposed to be comfortable, that we're supposed to feel comfortable in our faith, comfortable in our going to church and doing the church things, and then heading back home. It is not supposed to be comfortable.
That's a whole word right there. A whole word.
reminding myself of that.
It's really
Whoops.
good. Well, as always, we would love to hear from any of you listening at any point you happen to be listening. Again, we want this to be a conversation. So yeah, feel free to let us know your thoughts through email, text, smoke signal, YouTube comment, whatever it may happen to be, let us know. And yeah, just as one last reminder, we will not be joining you next week, but we'll be back in 2 weeks with an audience submitted topic and question. And so we'll look really forward to that. But until then, hope you guys have a great week and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
We'll see you then.